This is just a heads up, and I'll probably put this at the beginning of several videos. I am going to be including several points in this video where an ad could potentially be placed. This is in hope to future-proof my videos for changes that YouTube is going to be making going forward. So if there is just a random time where we fade to black, don't be alarmed. That's just where I'm hoping that YouTube will allow me to place an ad potentially. Hello, it's me, Julian Greystoke, and Giorgio, she's here. Can you hear her purring? I don't know if the mic will pick that up. She's closer to the mic than me, so maybe. I'm just here on a random day wearing my heated vest because I was just outside trying to fix our vehicle. We cannot fix it. We'll probably have to take it to the shop, but that doesn't matter because today we are here to do a little, probably pretty short follow-up video about Onyx Storm. As you hopefully know, I already have a more long-form review of Onyx Storm up on this channel, and if you want the full experience, I did a full, big, deep dive into the first book, and then a long-form review of the second book, and then obviously a long-form review of Onyx Storm. So if you want the full experience, you can check those out. But a lot of times after I do a deep dive, I'll do like a follow-up where it's like, hey, can we save this book? Do I feel like some edits would save this book? And one of the reasons I do that is I am both an author myself and a developmental editor. So my job is to help other people help their books be better. And a lot of people have surmised that Onyx Storm probably almost certainly didn't have any beta readers. I would be willing to bet a sizable amount of money that there were no beta readers involved, and possibly no developmental editor, or if there was one, they were given very little time and just did any like really big picture things that were book breaking and did not go into any other considerations for the book. Books like this and also the Lightlark series are making it so abundantly clear why we need developmental editors. Just giving your book to somebody to fix the spelling and grammatical errors is not enough. You need someone to look at your story with a critical eye and go, this isn't working, this doesn't make sense, please explain this. You need somebody to ask you a ton of questions. That is like the number one thing that I do when I'm developmental editing, is ask questions. And then you get to decide, is it answered later in the story, or I haven't answered it at all and I probably should, or if it's answered later in the story, do I want to answer it earlier? As you probably know, I had many questions about especially world building and things within the Silly Dragon book series, as I call it. I know it's called Fourth Wing or the Empyrean Saga Cycle, something like that, but I call it Silly Dragon book because that's what it is. Now, if you are for some reason here as a fan of these books and you're tempted to say, Julian, you're taking it way too seriously, it's just dragons and smexy times. Yes, but those can be good. I don't know why everybody seems to think that accessible fantasy means bad fantasy. Accessible fantasy can still be good. I just don't. I get it that it's not complex, but does it have to be stupid? Do we have to just have no answers for any questions? Does the world building have to completely dissolve like wet tissue paper the moment you ask any questions about it? No, I like to think that I write accessible fantasy. So if you are interested in seeing some fantasy that, I don't know, just cares a little bit more about being a fantasy book, but is still extremely accessible, I recommend you check out my books. But anyway, we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about friggin' Onyx Storm and what I think could be done to make this book better. I believe I have a video like this that I posted for patrons and channel members for the previous book, and I don't know if I'm going to do that again or if this one's going to go out to the public. You'll see. It'll be a surprise for both of us. But if you do want exclusive content never before seen here on the regular channel, please do check out my Patreon or channel memberships. Onyx Storm, all right? I'm going to go by memory. I didn't look back at my notes or anything to make this video, so if I get something wrong, I'm sorry. I only read it once, and I'm not going to read it again. The good news is I do think that there's things here to salvage in this book, and I'm not going to try to go too hard about stuff that I've already talked about, like how ridiculous their entire dragon school is. If they are trying to make more good soldiers, why would you kill anybody off if they just were having a bad day and like put a toe wrong and oh, oops, now they're dead. For one thing, wouldn't the dragons have a problem with that? Since they're supposed to be bonded, it's supposed to make the dragon sad when the rider dies. But anyway, I also have questions about what happens if a rider gets to old age and dies of old age, how that affects the dragon. What if a rider gets sick? Like there's so many questions, but whatever, we don't need to worry about those. My general rule of thumb for world building is if the characters don't know it, need it, or want to learn it, then you probably don't need to include it. But you, the author, need to know the answer to these things so that you write everything else with those things in the back of your mind so that things flow naturally. I don't know is probably not a good answer if you're ever asked anything about your world building. I know it seems silly to have knowledge of things that are not going to matter to the story, but you do kind of at least need to have a basic idea of how things work on a grander scale, even if it doesn't come up in the book, because it's going to be reflected in your writing. It will be obvious to readers that you don't know the answers to some of these questions. It's obvious to me that Rebecca Yarros doesn't know and doesn't care about a lot of details in her world. However, Onyx Storm is the book where it feels like she finally was given the note by somebody that maybe she should flesh out her world building a little bit, because this is the first one where the gods actually matter at all. And unfortunately, that is one of the problems with this book. On the one hand, I want to say, yes, good. I'm glad that the gods that you made up in the previous two books actually are starting to matter. But on the other hand, this isn't great because it's so obvious how little they mattered in the previous books that now that you're doing something with them, we can see the seams. We can definitely feel that you were probably told by somebody. I don't have any proof of this, but my theory is that Rebecca has somebody look at her reviews, sees what people are saying, and uses those ideas as jumping off points for the next book, which I don't feel like is how you should write your fantasy series. Now, I am a pantser, not a plotter, so I don't plot my series ahead of time. I have one trilogy that I have written that is still coming out, and I also am planning a duology with a different series that is a work in progress right now. But I would not feel comfortable myself as a pantser publishing book one in a series until I've written at least a first draft of all of the others. If you're a plotter, it's a bit easier, but you should definitely have a very structured plan of what that series looks like. And I don't think Rebecca Yarros has that. I think that she is pantsing. Like, the next book is as much a mystery to her as it is to us. And I really very strongly feel like that's a bad way to do it. I'm sure that there are people who are successful with that method, but I don't think Yarros, or Alex Astor, by the way, are those people. So the new world building details in this book were a big deal, and they also tie in with one of the other problems I had with this book, which was kind of like the pacing and the plotting. So we have two big things that are kind of new lore drops in that we have the iridescent dragons, which we learned about at the very end of the previous book, which Andarna is one of them. And we learn that we need to find Andarna's people to keep powering up our magical shield. And the other thing that we are learning about is that the gods are suddenly important. And some people pray to the whole pantheon, and some people have like picked a specific god that is the god that they specifically like relate to. It doesn't seem like it matters like which god you pick. I'm writing a book right now, the fantasy duology that I was talking about, where the characters are chosen by a specific god when they're born, and that is their god, and that is the one that they're like expected to worship. Versus in Onyx Storm, it doesn't really seem to matter. Like, you just kind of maybe gravitate towards a certain god because of whatever job you have in your society, and because Violet and her cohorts spend a lot of time in a deadly dragon death school, the god that gets mentioned the most is Malik, the god of death. But we find out about other gods in this book as well. Dune, who I believe is the god of war, is the one that gets brought up the most because the author is like, oh yeah, they're in a war school and they're going to war, so maybe they should do stuff with the god of war. And it seems like we're leaning Violet towards that. But, okay, so it's really hard for me to know where to begin because there's like 3 to 4 main things that are a problem with this book. And a lot of it has to do with the new world building that we got, because the world building was so thin up until now that attempting to do it in book 3 is clunky. It is so so clunky. This is kind of why you want to establish your world at least more than Rebecca Yarros had in your first book. Or, like, we could be expanding the world. There's nothing wrong with expanding. There's nothing wrong with starting small in your first book and expanding as you go. That's what happens in my Adventurer Mage series. The first book is like a very small, like very, very small look at the world. It gets a bit bigger in the second book, and then it gets big in the third book. That's fine. As your characters go further and further afield, they explore more and more of their world. But in this setting, all of the lore that she is dropping in book 3 is stuff that we probably could have known in book 1, especially the stuff about the gods. But in book 1, they were name dropped a few times because Yarros knows that fantasy worlds often have fantasy gods, so she threw a few in there. And like one tiny tidbit about them, which is that the god of death requires that you burn all of the dead person's belongings, but that mostly exists so that the characters can be rebellious by refusing to burn people's belongings, and those belongings always turn out to come in handy later. But anyway, the gods and that sort of thing do tie in to the other like structural issue I had with this series, which is that we find out we need Andy's people to charge the ward stones. We need to find this missing dragon race. Where are they? Breed, whatever they are. We need to find them. Where are they? And then we proceed to sit on our hands for like a sizable portion of the book before we finally go out adventuring to try to find them. And I think that is a huge mistake. I think that this whole book should A, be shorter, but B, be only the search for the iridescent dragons. Let's go see the world. We are on book 3. It is time to expand. Let us go see what the world looks like outside the very, very limited scope we've been given of Violet's homeland, her war-torn-ish homeland. Her school and the surrounding like cities are the only places we've gotten to see, and we haven't actually gotten to explore any cities because she only goes places where attacks are happening. So let's go see the world. And we kind of do, but here we run into another problem in that as we expand the world, it turns out it's just planets of hats. I talked about this in my review, but everywhere that Violet goes, she encounters a city, an island, whatever, that worships one specific god, and everybody in that place has made that god their entire personality. So they go to 3 different islands. I think it's 3, maybe it's 4, but where they just encounter 3 different challenges that are based on the god that is worshipped there. So they go to the place that's warlike and they have to compete in a war challenge. They go to the trickster place and they have to compete in a trickster challenge. They go to the wisdom place and they have to compete in a wisdom challenge. And then they're allowed to talk to the leadership. That's how it goes in every single one. And that is boring. It is mindless and repetitive and boring. There's nothing to it. It brings nothing new. We learn nothing new about the characters. They gain no new skills along the way. And that's what a journey is all about. In a journey story, which I don't think Rebecca Yarros has any experience writing. Like, she barely has experience writing fantasy, and fantasy journey story is pretty different from the fantasy stories that she's written so far, which are very much fantasy school stories. Whole different animal. And so in a fantasy journey story, what you're doing is you're traveling from place to place, and each place is going to be different, and you're going to have new experiences there that build the characters, that build the lore, that give the characters new abilities or knowledge that they can take forward towards the climax. So they shouldn't just be going from one basically identical island to the other that just has a gimmick at each one. I want to see them exploring forests, deserts, jungles. I want to see them exploring oceans and, yes, islands. But what is there? Who do they encounter? What kind of cultures are there? What kind of creatures are there? I'm ready for some new creatures. We have dragons, we have griffins, and we have wyverns, and that's it. I am ready for some new creatures. So let's go to some places where they have to encounter things that they've never experienced before. And also, let them encounter people who are unlike people that they've encountered before, because they just encounter civilizations and cultures that are very similar to their own, except for they are just really, really into one specific thing. It's like they went around and just found where all of the rest of the white people are. By the way, I have tea in this awesome mug, and I'm getting lipstick all over it. So as you see my lipstick steadily disappearing, that's why. So yes, structurally, the big problem with this book is we have a sizable chunk until like about 50% of the book. We don't make any movement, no forward movement in the plot. The characters do stuff, but there's no forward movement in the plot. And then at about the 50% mark, we go on the journey to find the iridescent dragons. We go to a couple different islands that have gimmicks, and then literally the iridescent dragons show up and serve themselves to the main character. And that's not what you want to see. You want to see the character gathering clues, finding their way, getting closer and closer through actions of their own to finding the thing that they are seeking. Not, okay, well, it's about that time in the book when the dragons should show up, so here they are.
That's not how any of this works.
And then we meet them, they're smug and unhelpful, and then everybody just goes back to status quo for another sizable chunk of the book. So the pacing in this book is absolutely garbage, especially for a book that could have been a journey book. Journey books do kind of have a pacing that can get a little tiring to some people of action and rest, action and rest. The action and rest scenes should be of varying lengths. You don't want to be like, this chapter's action, this chapter's rest, this chapter's action, this chapter's rest. Longer action, a short rest. Shorter action, a long rest. However you want to vary it up, whatever feels natural for your story. And some people don't like that rhythm, and some people don't like a journey book. But if you're going to set up at the beginning of your story that this feels like it's going to be a journey book, I need it to be a journey. So the main thing that I would say if I was editing for this book is I would be like, Rebecca, level with me, be so for real with me. What would be wrong? What would we lose if this was a journey book? If we cut everything else out, what do we lose that we need going forward into your series, which I hope you know what we need going forward into your series, Rebecca. What do we lose if we just turn this into a journey book? And the things that we might lose, can we put those into the journey? Is that possible? I would have early on, I would have Violet be like, we need to do a heist because Rebecca loves her heists. We can keep one. She'd be like, we need to do a heist because I think there's a map in a secret library somewhere of where the iridescent dragons are. So they do a heist. They get the map and then they bugger off. And it is just Violet and her team, her close crew on a journey for most of the book. There's no help coming for them. They are away from home. They are experiencing being out in the wilds for the first time, but they are determined. So they will face obstacles and they will face issues and they will maybe lose sometimes or have to flee sometimes because as we know, as we talked about in the review, Yarro doesn't like to hurt her characters. People have pointed out that she won't kill characters. She certainly won't kill characters she likes. Violet's main group is very, very safe. But also, she doesn't even like to injure characters. If she hurts somebody, that injury is healed pretty dang fast. Even the guy who loses his leg, it doesn't really affect him or the story. It certainly doesn't affect the story, and it barely affects him. He's a little bit sad. He's having to relearn how to function. But again, in the society that Yarro set up, I'm going to keep saying, as I mentioned in my review, so hopefully you watch the review. As I mentioned in the review, in the society that Yarro set up, the guy who loses a leg shouldn't be allowed to live in the society that Yarros has previously established. But another thing that she's doing in this book is scaling way back on the ridiculous brutality of the school, because I think she's gotten enough notes from people saying, hey, if you're trying to raise a dragon-riding army, it's stupid to kill them off yourselves.
It's so dumb.
It's so dumb, it's brilliant.
No! It's just dumb.
At least let the enemy kill them off. The entire murder school idea, I'm sure, sounded very cool in Yarros' head and also as a pitch for the book she was going to write, but in practice, it doesn't make any goddamn sense. And unfortunately, your book does need to make internal sense. Like, you can have crazy stuff in your story, but it has to work together with the world that you've created. And the fact that they kill off all of their dragon riders for tripping one day, they trip and get stabbed, no, that's not logical at all. In my version of the book, Violet and company, they go on a journey, they encounter lots of things. I would scale way back on the number of characters. We are not taking everybody and their brother with us on this adventure. I would maybe say like 1 Griffin rider, maximum 2, and then Violet's very, very inner circle, and that's it. So her team, the fourth wing, that team that she's been forming, just those guys, minus the one who lost a leg in the previous book. Unfortunately, he's going to have to be benched for this book. Sucks, but that's going to have to be the case. they go out. And also the Griffin Rider who is with them is going to be useful. The Griffin Rider is going to bring something to the table that nobody else here has. Potentially because they are from outside of Navarre and all of those protected barriers, the Griffin Rider would have a lot more experience of how to survive outside of a protected zone, because these spoiled dragon riders have been living inside their magical bubble their entire lives, whereas the Griffin Riders have not only been having to deal with the dragon riders, hoarding all of the resources and the magical protection, but also have been having to deal with the venin and anything else that's out here in the world. So we could even go to some Griffin Rider villages and check them out, find out what they're all about. And yes, I want to see them be different from the Dragon Riders, because we find out in this book that the Griffin Riders and the Dragon Riders, they worship the same gods and they worship them in exactly the same way. And as I talked about in my video about building religions and my video about world building through culture, it cannot be that homogenous. There are so many religions in our world, and every individual person has a slightly different relationship with their religion. So finding out that this culture who has been outside of your society for so long is still treating your gods exactly the same way is just not, again, it's unrealistic for your world. Your world needs to make internal sense. So I want to go to Griffin Rider villages. I want to see how people react to the Dragon Riders. Maybe for once, Violet and her crew are not the coolest people around, and maybe the Griffin Riders aren't happy to see them, and maybe Violet has to learn how to be humble, and so does frickin' Xaden. I'll get to frickin' Xaden, but everybody needs to learn to be a little bit humble and stop thinking that their dragon riding society is the best society ever and the only one that can ever get anything done, because they are going to learn how tenacious and determined the Griffin Riders are. These people have been living without magic. They've been living in unprotected zones where the venin are. They have also been dealing with the Dragon Riders. They would be such a scrappy, tenacious people. And that could be something that the Dragon Riders have to come to grips with, is the fact of how spoiled they are. Even though their school is stupid and people die all the time in it, they need to see a world where people don't have everything they need provided to them like they are used to back home. So I want to see Violet and company challenged not only with their abilities and their powers and their skills, but also the way that they think about their world. I want them to go back to the Dragon School after this adventure with a brand new worldview that is going to push them forward into the next books. Because one of the things that desperately needs to start happening is that Violet needs to start pushing against the whole system in her world instead of just, oh, there's one or two bad leaders around. Because the system is stupid.
It's not stupid. It's advanced.
The system gets so many people killed needlessly. The system had them at war with griffins when they did not need to be, and in fact it was probably just a power grab and they were just stealing from the griffin people. Also, something that we could definitely explore is the iridescent dragons when we meet them. If they are the peace dragons like they were in the book, and the peace dragons are like upset, understandably, because, hey, we sent you one of our babies and you immediately took her to war. You took a child to war. Fuck you for that. I would love to explore more of the dragon culture and how the dragons that are along for the ride for this are dealing with this fact that they did take a baby to war, and maybe they have other options. Once they've seen the peace dragons, they could have other options to go, maybe I don't need to be used as a weapon of war. Maybe there are other options for me as a dragon besides bonding with a human and going to war. Like, it's just very convenient in the story that all of the dragons who are not the peace dragons are just completely on board with all of the war stuff. They're like, yep, this is how it goes. We love bonding with humans. We love going into battle. This is what we want. Even though dragons die. Humans die and dragons are devastated by it. Dragons die and then humans are killed by it. Like, this is a bad system that needs to be dismantled, and Violet needs to explore that and think about that. And I think a really great way to do that would be encountering the peace dragons and spending time with them and learning why they chose this path instead of the violent path. Like, the peace dragons seem to have a better handle on their powers, so like, could dragons have a lot more powers? Peace dragons can bond and then break bonds whenever they want to. It's like, we have so many options to explore. But Yarros is too attached to her very Americanized fantasy world where might is right, where the only thing that can stop a bad person with a gun is a good person with a gun. Just all of this idea that the infrastructure of violence is the correct infrastructure. And anybody who says differently is portrayed as super smug, super judgmental, and condescending and wrong. So with the structure of the book wildly changed, would I try to fit in the gods? Maybe, but not to the extent that Yarros has tried to do. I would start to introduce it as a concept slowly instead of trying to make it such a big deal. I would definitely not have the cities of hats. Instead, I would explore things within Violet's team. Maybe she slowly starts to learn that some of her teammates are more religious than she is, and they follow different gods. And that is true from what I can tell from the book. The little bit that we get, some of Violet's team do follow different gods. Violet is not very interested in following or worshiping gods her own self, and that's fine. But she could learn more about her team and who they are as people. And that's another great thing that journey books do, is they give you those moments of rest for team building and learning about people. Because another issue that Yarros has is her side characters are always to the side. They never really get to take the spotlight. They never get to be anything besides just like one character trope. Like, for example, one of them is the funny guy, and he makes a lot of snarky remarks, and people really like that. Well, he could be the funny guy and have depth. Did you know that?
Both.
I have a video that I still really like about writing a 5-man band, and that's still one of my favorite tropes, so go check that video out if you're interested. And I have another video about making interesting side characters. I have so many videos on this channel, so check that one out too if you want to elevate your side characters further than what Yarros has done. And of course, we have the issue of Xaden and Violet, and if we're going to keep jumping off of the previous book, Xaden is a venin, and we can keep the lore, I guess, that if he doesn't drain from the earth, he won't become more evil, even though I think that that's stupid. And I think that we really need to find out that venin are not in fact evil, but just sort of another way of interacting with magic. And the bad thing about it is that they drain the land, and so we, instead of having to figure out how to make Xaden not turn venin at all, we have to figure out how to make it so Xaden can use his abilities without draining the land, because it's the draining the land that's the bad thing. You don't want to leave patches of dead earth that, can't grow things everywhere. So, as within the story that we actually have within the book, Violet realizes that Xaden can drain certain objects. So she has a magical object, and Xaden inadvertently drains it and uses his power from that instead of from the land. And so they should figure this out, and then figure out, as they're journeying, how to empower these objects over and over again so that Xaden can use his abilities without turning evil. And maybe they could go back at the end to the Dragon School and be like, hey, we found this solution, only to be laughed at and told, don't be stupid, the venin are evil. What do you think? It go away. Like, let's do that, and let's have Violet think she finds a way and then be denied by the bad people at the school, because once again, we have to learn that the system is wrong and we have to dismantle it. I don't know if Yarros is going to get there. I feel like maybe she will at like the very end, but also she is very attached to her dragon school and her little weird dragon society. So I don't know if she's going to be brave enough to change it, because that's what it needs. It needs to be dismantled. Also, the whole thing that's very confusing at the end about Violet maybe being like a chosen of Dune, the god of war, I don't know where that's going, and I'm not certain I completely understand it. It seems like maybe Violet's grandmother, who we just introduced in this book, wanted her to go be like a nun or something, some sort of acolyte of this temple, and that's why her hair was starting to go silver, because the people there, some of them dye their hair silver, but there's also like implications that maybe some people just are born with silver hair like Violet's. So I'm not sure which way we're going with that. We find out that Violet is maybe like connected to the god of war somehow. And that could be interesting maybe, but I think that needs to be taken out of this book. We could start having some inklings of it as Violet is journeying with her friends and learning about which gods they worship and learning about their relationships with those gods. She might start to feel an affinity towards a certain god as she's journeying. Besides Malik, I don't know why we're going with war instead of death for her, because like they're always praying to Malik in these books. So she starts to feel an affinity for a certain god thanks to hanging out with her friends who are talking about the gods in the way that they worship. And that could be a slow start to maybe later finding out in a later book that Violet is maybe chosen of the god of war. Although that is kind of disappointing, and a lot of fans of the books have pointed this out, that the Violet that we have now is a totally different person from the Violet we had in the first book, and it's not because of character growth. It's not that she grew and changed. It's that she's just straight up a different person. Violet in the first book, at least ostensibly, was like, yes, a physical weakling, quote unquote, but she was clever. She was supposed to be using her wits to outsmart those people who were bigger and stronger than her. But now, Violet is just strong enough to defeat everyone. She never has to be clever anymore. Except for at one moment in this book where she had to defeat the smarty pants people, and so she had to be the smartest one in the room. Violet always has to be the ist in the room, the best, the smartest, the strongest, the fastest. But what I would love to see is if her god, whichever she's chosen of, is a god of like wisdom or even trickery, the trickster god, you know, instead of god of war. We are just leaning so hard on Violet just being the best at war, and it's like, maybe Yaros will take it in an unexpected direction, but I just don't love where it seems to be headed now. So those are the big things that I would change. Oh, Violet and Xaden, stop contriving stupid reasons for them not to boink all the time, and instead just maybe have them be more like adults and less like horny teenagers all the time. I think it would be fine for them to be a couple in this book. Just maybe not quite so horny all the time. Everybody, I keep hearing constantly how people want to read about, like, I want to read about a married couple. I want to read about an established couple. I'm so sick of only hearing about the beginning of the relationship. Now, some people are going to butt up against this because for many romance readers, the beginning of the relationship is their favorite part, the slow building of the relationship. But it's too late for that, Yarros. You've already got them together in book 3. Book 2, they were already pretty much together. In book 3, they are very much together. So you set yourself up for this, use it. Instead of coming up with all of these stupid reasons why they can't have sex, just let them. Maybe there's a few more sex scenes in this book. Or maybe there's not, because they're on a journey and that'd be awkward to keep having sex all the time when your friends are in camp right over there. But maybe they sneak off for a couple of really sexy rendezvous, and then after they're done, oh no, danger strikes. Oh, it's a dinosaur. I don't know what could attack them, you know? It's a manticore. It's a unicorn. Like, let's get some more creatures in here. Let them be a couple and see how that goes. And they could face external things that challenge them as a couple, because maybe they're still not that great at working together. Both of them are very, like, I don't want to say highly independent people, because they're not. They're very codependent on each other. But we could not have that be so much of a thing. If they're very independent people, they could be running into the problem where each of them keeps thinking that they're the one that needs to save the day, and they get in each other's way. They step on each other's toes. They bollocks each other up because they're both trying to, like, be the hero. That could be a fun dynamic. There's a whole bunch of dynamics that you could explore with them as a couple, without them having to just constantly be thrown stupid contrived reasons that they can't boink. Xaden needs a lot of fleshing out as a character. Xaden is such a non-person. I mean, nobody's very deep as a character, not Violet either, but Xaden is just frustrating. He's a slab of meat. He's a sexy slab of meat with shadow powers. In a book series this long, I'm gonna need you to be something else, especially as it seems like Yarros is trying more and more to turn this into a fantasy series that's heavy on romance instead of just a romance that has a fantasy set dressing. We're gonna need to start developing some characters into real people with flaws, like real flaws, not sexy flaws, real problems, real struggles. Maybe we could deal with Xaden's mother somewhere in here, and he could actually have to process the fact that maybe she didn't want to abandon him. Like, he feels abandoned, but maybe she didn't want that, and it was outside of her power to control. And what that does to Xaden's view of her, where all of this time he's just been thinking that his mother abandoned him, when in reality she didn't have a choice and she was taken away from him. There's so many things to explore with that if we allow Xaden to have emotions, because The only emotion he's allowed to have is like anger and like a little bit of consternation and lust. It's okay for men to have emotions. I think that this author is afraid that giving Xaden any kind of emotional moments will make him emasculated, and that is so stupid and so toxic, and please stop that immediately. We want to read about characters that have emotions, whether they are the male characters or the female characters or the non-binary characters. People are allowed to have emotions, and in fact, they should within the course of your story. Emotions of your characters are an important part of stories. All right. I think those are all of my thoughts. I actually talked about this way longer than I thought I would. Yay for you, I guess. I mean, hopefully you're enjoying this. I don't know. Maybe nobody watched it, and I just rambled like this for my own entertainment. Please comment below and let me know how you would fix Onyx Storm if you were allowed to. Comment below, let me know. Also, let me know if you liked my version, if you would read that. And if you do want to read what I feel are some very accessible fantasy books, I have them. They're available now on Amazon. All the links are in the doobly-doo. And if you're interested in hiring me as a developmental editor, very probably I will not have you do a huge structural rewrite like I would for Onyx Storm. So do not panic that if you hire me, I'm going to demand that you rewrite your entire book. Probably not going to happen. And if I do, you can always ignore my suggestions, but I will mostly be helping you on the macro and micro level. Just make your book better, because as is very much proven by some of these awful books that are coming out nowadays, you need other people to look at your book. You need developmental editing of some variety if you want your book to make sense, for it to be plotted well, for it to read well, for the characters to feel real. There's so many reasons to get developmental editing, so definitely consider it. Message me on Fiverr, we'll talk. All right, that's enough out of me today. I've got other stuff to do. I will see all of you again next time with whatever it is I happen to be doing next time. Bye.
Just fear me, love me, do as I say, and I will be your slave.
Okay, so you could do what Jareth suggests, and I'd totally understand if you would, or you could just become a patron on my Patreon, just like all these lovely people, like Zenith, Corey, Ashley, Bunna, Nemo, Tactical Hot Dog, Haley History Nerd, Stephanie, Rhea, Christina, Cameron, Lady Kragan, Jose, Lunar Muse, AJ, Marshy, Semi-Dark, GK, Scout, Annika, Jen, Gay Tutter, Tina, Laknuga, SB Boots, Martha Baggins, July, Bird Anonymous, Sarah, Kat, 78 Kilograms of Shade, Ingrid, Roma, Pansing Pony, Haley, Sam, Kira, Kohikaro, Mooney, Puttamancer, Kirsten, Bear, Jojo Bookish, Robin, Ursula, Caitlin, KJ, Mufflier, Celia, Alyssa, Deborah, Swamp Goblin Waifu, Sophia, Merween, Kit, Hidden Glade, Light Julie, Patrick, Anne Sophie, Callison, Vampire Antihero, Shelby, Zaire, Jesper, Rennie, Scribbling Cat, Savvy, Jenny, and Amanda.
You have no power over me.